Hey guys, this is Mr. O'Brien here, and this is your topic 4 video. Um, and topic 4 goes over bioenergetics. Now, bioenergetics is just a fancy term for how our body creates energy. Now, we have two types of energy kind of creation, if you want to think about it. Cellular respiration and photosynthesis. But when we refer to energy, what we are always referring to is the molecule of ATP. And right here is our molecule. Now you notice this molecule is made of three parts. It's made of a ribose sugar, it's made of an adenine, and it's also made of a phosphate. Now this phosphate right here is where the energy is stored. 3 phosphates equals a large amount of stored energy. When we break that phosphate off, it releases energy and it almost uncharges the battery. So what does life need? Obviously, all life needs energy. Now, different types of organisms harness energy in different ways, and the first one we're going to talk about are autotrophs. Now, autotrophs, like plants, are able to make energy from sunlight, and this is key right here. Sunlight is pretty much the ultimate source of all the energy on Earth. We call these organisms that can produce their own food from the substance available in their surroundings autotrophs. Autotrophs make their own energy. So what happens is the sunshine, it strikes this plant right here, and this allows that plant to make energy. Now, examples of other things but trees, plants, algae, and even some bacteria are able to make their own energy. Now, there's a couple types of autotrophs we have. The first one are chemotrophs. Now, the way I always think about chemotrophs, chemo are chemicals. So we're getting our energy from chemicals in the environment. Obtain energy by converting organic compounds, now organic compounds are chemicals, into an energy source. Now, over here we have a picture of a volcanic hot spring, and you see all these unique colors around the outside. Now, what happens here is we are actually converting sulfur into energy in these microscopic organisms, and they're usually called extremophiles because of the extreme conditions they live in. Now, photoautotrophs, what they do is they capture sun's photons. So they use the sunshine, kind of, referring to our autotrophs here, an example of that, and they use that sunshine to make energy. So chemicals, chemotrophs, photons of light, photosynthesis, or phototrophs. Now, some organisms need to eat their food, like our trout right here. This trout's eating a mayfly. Now, this is referred to as a heterotroph, and they cannot make their own food and rely on other organisms for nutrition by consuming that food. So what they do is they consume carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates are broken down to produce ATP in the body. So dogs, cats, birds, fish, and humans are all heterotrophs because we have to eat our energy. Now, this kind of brings us to the law of thermodynamics. Now, energy is not just created out of thin air. And the law of thermodynamics dictates that no energy can be created or destroyed. It can only change forms. Our bodies are unable to make their own energy, so we need to convert bonds in food into molecules our systems can use. And this is very important. Chemical bonds are literally energy. You think about a glucose molecule, the carbon-to-carbon bond, a lipid molecule like we talked about in last topic, where those long chains of carbon bonds are where the energy comes from. So what happens is our chemical energy in carbohydrates, fats, it enters into our body and goes through chemical reactions inside of our body. Now, our body gives off carbon dioxide and water as waste, as well as heat. But what is produced is ATP, which is our body's energy currency. Now, ATP is very important. ATP is one of the most important molecules in biology. And ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Again, high energy molecule produced during photosynthesis and cellular respiration. The key is those 3 phosphates. So what happens is ATP is produced, and over time, our body is going to need energy. So what happens is our body uses energy for some sort of cellular work or to let a chemical reaction occur, and we convert that into ADP. So the way I always think of this is ATP is like a charged battery. It's where our energy is stored. And when ADP or ATP is used up to make ADP, it's like uncharging the battery. So once ADP is made, our body wants to turn it back into ATP. And this is done using energy from food that enters in this reaction. Now, going back to this topic, ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is vital for life. ATP is the molecule found in cells of living organisms. It is very important because it transports energy necessary for all of the body's activities. So ATP is responsible for providing energy, and that energy is used to power chemical reactions, to allow our body to move. So ATP is very, very important. Anytime you're doing any sort of work, digestion, growing and developing, anything like that requires ATP. Now, ATP, let's kind of go over this cycle a little bit more in depth. So again, ATP again is our high energy molecule that we have up here, kind of where we're looking right there. So what happens is when ATP is used, a phosphate bond is broken off. Now when that phosphate is released, energy is released for the cell. Now energy is needed in the cell when one of the phosphates is broken and released. The energy is used by the cell to perform work, and then we convert it into ADP. Now ADP is our carrier molecule, kind of just like a placeholder. So in order to replace that ATP after we use work from that ADP, we need to add a phosphate back in. And this phosphate is added back in from energy from food. So to make ATP, the body goes through a process called cellular respiration. During this process, ATP is produced from stored energy in food, like in our glucose, and a phosphate is added to put it back. And this is how that cycle works. So again, ATP, used by the cell to perform any sort of cellular work. ADP is then restored back to ATP during cellular respiration. So this is the first part of topic 4. Hopefully this helps you out with ATP, and remember that is a very important molecule in biology.